I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today we're taking a close look at the new Audi RS Q3, the second generation RS Q3 that's been available here in Australia. But this time around, the RS Q3 is an altogether more serious proposition because the new Q3, which we rate pretty highly on Chasing Cars, was actually designed from the very beginning of the process to be transformed into an RS level vehicle. Whereas with the first gen Q3, they kind of decided later to make it an RS car, and so that influences how cohesive a performance model can really feel. But that's not the only difference. There's also a new big variation in the body styles that you can choose with the RS Q3. Over my right shoulder is the conventional, I guess, wagon body you would call. The normal RS Q3 comes in at a tick under $90,000 here in Australia. Over my left shoulder, in that absolutely wild Kyalami green color, is the new RS Q3 Sportback. $3,000 more, a touch lighter, and a little bit more expressive in how that rear end looks. Audi expects that most people buying an RS Q3 are actually going to go for the more rakishly lined Sportback. But in today's video, we're going to consider the differences between the two, which one I'd go for, and whether or not this fast little 5-cylinder SUV is a good performance buy. So before we get started, make sure to hit subscribe below the video and the notification bell. Leave me a comment at any point about your view on the RS Q3. And now let's get started inside. Jumping inside the new RS Q3, and we're reminded of one of the main reasons we really like the underlying Q3 crossover. And that's the really great, well thought out interior, which largely carries over to the RS version, but there are enough changes to make you feel like it's worth, $40,000 more or so. And those changes start with this steering wheel, really aggressive shape. We've got this full perforation leather wrap and a flat bottom. Not going to be to everybody's taste, but it certainly looks and feels cool in the hand, and paddle shifters behind that for the dual clutch gearbox. And we'll get to how that works in just a minute. We're also sitting on unique RS seats here, fine nappa leather on the upholstery, a really cool honeycomb quilting pattern throughout, pretty tight bolsters here on the side which help to keep you in place in the corners, and there's also a wide range of electric adjustments, so I think almost anybody is going to be able to get comfortable in this car. Now, as standard, the RS Q3 comes with these really attractive aluminium inlays. You can pay more to have them as carbon fiber twill, but I actually like the way they are by default, matched really nicely to this grey Alcantara finish that brings a little bit of warmth into the cabin as well. As for the technology, really good, barely a bad word to say about it. We got this really crisp touchscreen down here in the center. I actually think Audi's single touchscreen system works better than their more expensive cars, which have two touchscreens, because we still have physical controls here for the climate, which is way easier to use on the move than fiddling around with a lower screen. In front of us though, we also have a virtual cockpit, 12 inches in size, really big, bright and crisp. You can put a full map up there, your media options, plus we have wireless Apple CarPlay, wired Android Auto, and Audi's Connect Plus suite of internet connected technologies, stuff like fuel prices, parking spaces, Google search integration. So this really does feel pretty cutting edge in the segment in terms of the available tech. We've also got standard wireless phone charging and a really cracking Bang & Olufsen stereo that actually sounds great in the real world. And it's practical too. Big cup holders between the seats, adjustable armrest here, and a central bin, and door bins too. So in terms of looking for issues with the RS Q3's cabin, that's really difficult. So let's check out the back seat. Jumping into the back of the RS Q3, and it's very practical, though this is one of the areas where you will notice a difference between the standard car and the Sportback. That being said, that's kind of clutching at straws, because even though that Sportback has a lower, racier roofline, I still fit in it, but I do have more headroom here in the standard car. I'm 6 foot and I've got heaps of space above me. This car doesn't have a sunroof, so that does help a little bit, but even if it did, it'd be fine. Legroom is okay, sitting behind myself, and so's toe room, even though these racy kind of bucket seats up front are more bulky than the pews in the standard car. Now you could get 3 people across if you really had to. There is a bit of a hump in the floor though, so I'd probably keep it at 2 in the outboard seats, which themselves are pretty comfy actually. We have a flip down armrest here in the center. That has cup holders, folds away nice and easy. We've also got air vents, 2 USB-C ports, and a 12-volt socket, along with extra bottle holders here in the doors. It's here around the back where the differences in the design of these two RS Q3 variants becomes a lot more obvious. The conventional car or wagon bodied version has a longer roofline. The whole car is taller, looks a little bit more substantial, a little bit more rugged, whereas the Sportback has this fast, sharp cutaway here on the tailgate, which gives it more of the appearance of a coupe. Now, usually that's not something I love, but I do think Audi are the only German luxury manufacturer who are able to make their coupe SUVs look not hideous. And I actually think the Q3 Sportback looks pretty cool. So it does come down to your personal taste, and you can let me know below whether you prefer the conventional Q3 or the Sportback variant. While we're here, I'll mention that on the RS Q3, all of the standard metallic colors are included. You don't have to pay extra, which is really nice. What you do have to choose though is whether you want the black package, which is on this green Sportback. That's actually standard now. You actually have to option in the matte aluminium silver package, which is on the red car. Now it's a no cost option, but for me, I really do prefer the matte aluminium over the black, but once again, it's personal taste. All right, let's take a look under those boots and see if there's a practicality difference. All right, let's start with the conventional RS Q3, electric tailgate. That's a standard feature on both cars, and it operates nice and smartly and gets out of your way. Now, 530 litres is the amount of space back here. It's a nice big practical boot, same as the standard Q3, really square, load height isn't too high, and it's also fairly flush, so you'll be able to slide your suitcases straight in and out. And we have a net here so that when you drive in the RS Q3 as it was intended to be driven, all of your stuff in the back isn't going to be rolling around and causing a din. Plus, we've got a little storage space off to the left. We've got a couple of hooks, and also you can put those seats down for quite a bit of length in terms of your overall space back there. So pretty good. Next, we'll check out whether the Sportback makes you accept any compromises. As we talked about before, the Sportback involves accepting a cutaway, a physical cutaway to the tailgate. So it's a shock to find out that there's actually 530 litres of space back here in this boot as well. So how do they do it? The laws of physics are a thing. Basically, the way this works is that boot space measurements really only come up to the window line, and to the window line, these cars are pretty much identical. You are going to lose some vertical space just as a reality of the shape of the car, so slightly taller objects will fit in this one, but not in the Sportback. However, when you fold those seats down, basically everything works out in the wash, and both of these are fairly practical SUVs for the small segment and will fit quite a bit in, and both also have bigger boots than the old RS Q3. But of course, boot space, it's just a small part of the story. These cars are mainly about the driving, and that's what we're going to do now. So, what is the Q3 Sportback like to drive? Well, I've woken up early the next morning. It's the next day from the last scene you saw, so we can get some quiet time out here on these roads in western New South Wales. And I think the only way to start is with a launch. Right, so there's no avoiding that the RS Q3 is quick. And that's largely because of what's under the bonnet of this SUV, and it's one of Audi's classic hits. A 2.5 litre inline 5-cylinder turbo petrol engine. Now, over the years, this engine has produced many different outputs. It's also switched from an iron block to an aluminium block now, which has made it lighter. But here in the new RS Q3, it makes 294 kilowatts of power and 480 Newton meters of torque. So if you're kind of thinking about comparing a car like this to a Volkswagen Golf R or a Volkswagen T-Roc R, it's a big step up from the 2-litre 4-cylinder in those vehicles. Step up of 500 cc's in capacity, but also a step up in, 80 kilowatts of power and about 100 Newton meters of torque. And you just feel the impact of that difference basically everywhere you go to drive this car quickly, because it is a quick car. 0 to 100 comes up in 4.5 seconds, which is fast. I mean, a Golf R would be about as quick as that, but it's more like the way the RS Q3 and Audis equipped with the 5-cylinder in general go about making their power. First of all, there's the noise. 5-cylinder engines make this really wonderful offbeat thrum, which even the best 4-cylinder can't match for oral character. So that is one benefit. It's also a little smoother, But I also think that just because the 5-cylinder is now one of the rare types of petrol engines in the world, there's also just some inherent bragging rights to it as well. Now, the 5-cylinder delivers its power in a way that does feel pretty boosty. So if you shift down to third, for example, put your foot down, there's a little delay as revs build to about 3,500 RPM, and then it really comes on song. So it's a bit of an old school turbo in that regard. There's still plenty of thrust at low revs and around town, but you kind of have to go hunting for this engine's best. So I suppose in that way it involves you a little bit more as a driver, but it doesn't have that kind of absolutely instant torque that you might be used to if you're coming up out of a really sort of frenetic, fast 4-cylinder. But you can test drive it and see if the RS Q3 is to your liking. Speaking of the gearbox, we've got a 7-speed wet clutch, dual clutch automatic in this car, and it does a good job. The Volkswagen Group's wet clutch, dual clutches are the ones to go for. Not only are they more reliable, but they're also smoother, more imperceptible, and they just generally seem to find the right gear. And in this car, 7 gears is about enough because it then allows it to cruise at reasonably quiet revs on the freeway. And cruise the RS Q3 can, because even though it feels largely like a pumped up hot hatch, the suspension is still somehow supple enough. We have those big 21-inch wheels, which worried me looking at the spec of this car. But Audi Australia have spec'd all of our RS Q3s with the dynamic suspension but adaptive dampers, and those dampers do a really good job of ironing out the worst of bumps in the road. And in particular, the RS Q3 is very adept at mid-corner bump absorption. It doesn't allow itself to be thrown off its line, and that's really impressive. So coming up a really nice road here, early morning in the RS Q3, that's exactly what this car is all about. And I say it feels like a pumped up hot hatch because it does. You can very much sense that this is an RS3 crossover. The old car was as well, but honestly the new Q3 in general feels like such a more cohesive and sophisticated vehicle than the old car, and that's also true for the RS version. It really does feel like a higher, slightly more butch RS3, I suppose. And of course, heaps of people, myself included, prefer a hot hatch which sits closer to the road. But if this is the way it's going to go, and Audi does expect a lot of RS3 people are going to move up to the RS Q3, if this is the way it's got to go, I'm not unhappy, because it doesn't drive like an SUV, it drives like a pumped up hatch, and that's fine. That includes all the great stuff about the RS3, like its kind of inherent 4-wheel driftability. The stability control setting in this car also has a sport setting, which is kind of like a halfway house, and if you're really brave with the throttle on corner exit, it will let you achieve a little bit of 4-wheel slip, and that's pretty fun, and sort of puts paid to the idea that Audi Quattro has to be boring. It really doesn't. We've also got really big brakes, 375mm at all 4 corners on the RS Q3, which helps to bring this little pumped up truck to a stop with alacrity. Now, as you can probably hear, refinement isn't the strongest suit, and that's simply because of the aggressive rubber on this car. The normal Q3 is pretty quiet, but we have some fairly pronounced road noise in the RS version. But hey, you're not buying an RS version for it to be soft, so I think that's something most people are going to accept. Visibility out is really good. That's a benefit of the SUV form factor and the big glass house. Now I'm driving the standard version. The Sportback is a little bit harder to see out the back of, but it's not crazy, so I wouldn't not buy the Sportback for that reason. And what both of them share is a really high specification generally, but also how that applies to safety tech. They've basically got everything the Q3 can offer. 360-degree camera makes it easy to park. Then we've got all the long-range radars, high-speed AEB, adaptive cruise, lane keep assist with lane centering, blind spot monitoring, basically the whole lot. However, while the exhaust note, and especially that crazy intake noise, sounds really good, fans of pops and bangs are going to be really disappointed because Audi have had to fit the petrol particulate filter to the 2.5 litre 5 now, and that robs the exhaust of those effects. There's no more sort of, if we just rev a little, lift off, yeah. Even in the most dynamic settings through the drive modes, there's no crackles and pops. Occasionally you can catch it off guard, and you will hear a single solitary pop from the exhaust, but you know, extroverts among us will need to look elsewhere now. So those are our detailed opinions on the new 2020 Audi RS Q3 in both conventional and Sportback body forms. I'm actually a big fan of this hot little SUV. The underlying Q3 is a really good crossover, and it turns out that by stuffing the 2.5 litre turbo 5-cylinder engine under the bonnet and basically making everything else mechanical about this SUV even better, you end up with a great proposition. Now, $90,000 is quite a bit of money for a small Audi SUV, but I do feel like you're getting your money's worth in just how much this SUV is able to do on a great road. But I want to know what you reckon. Would you consider an RS Q3 over something like a GLA 45 or even over an RS3 hatch? Is this where the hot hatch game is moving? Let me know all of your thoughts below in the comments box. While you're there, make sure you hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.